welcome to episode 257 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with...
Michael O'Malley.
Lydia Creech.
Logan Kenny.
And Jessica Carr.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1949's Late Spring. But first, let's jump into movies that we saw this week. And I'm going to kick it off with probably the big movie from the past week. And that is the, quote, reimagining of The Lion King. Directed by Jon Favreau, it is the latest in Disney's attempt to glean money off of us by remaking the same thing and not doing any extra work. This version of The Lion King stars Donald Glover, Beyonce, Chiwetel Ejiofor, John Oliver, Seth Rogen, and Billy Eichner, among many others. And I'm not even going to go into the synopsis. It's the exact same thing as the animated 1994 Lion King, but with, quote, again, in quotations, real life looking lions and other animals. So, was not a fan of this movie. Michael and I were talking before we recorded this about the trend of these Disney reimaginings, these remakes of their animated classics, and it's relatively hit or miss. Most of them have been kind of misses. I honestly enjoyed I didn't love it, but I enjoyed to an extent Jon Favreau's redo of The Jungle Book, because it took the source material of The Jungle Book and at least did something. It validated itself into being like a reimagining, like it did something different. And that's not the case here with The Lion King. They're copying entire scenes, they're copying lines, they're copying shots, they're copying songs. It's just completely a carbon copy of the animated movie, but into this live action form. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about in relation to this, other than talk about how bad it is in how animals just... animals can't emote. They're animals. They don't have the facial structures to do that, so it doesn't work.
They don't have eyebrows.
Yeah, it doesn't work. The thing that really I kind of took away from this is just the complete disregard and just negligent, work by Disney to kind of... It's just a complete misunderstanding of why we have animation. Why animation works in the way that it does, because... Just watching this, you watch sequences in the film, and when you think about it compared to the animated counterpart, there's the singing sequence with "I Can't Wait to Be King," or the sequence where Scar is singing "Be Prepared," and it's just so emotionally vacant. It's so completely removed from everything that made The Lion King compelling, the original so compelling, because it at least had this visual flair, this wonderful hand-drawn animation that really, popped it off the screen. And Logan, I know you watched this movie, so I'll be curious to get your thoughts. And Michael, you haven't seen it, but I as somebody who kind of is a fan of animation and has watched a lot of Disney's work, I'll be curious to get your opinion. But I think that just the real takeaway I have from this movie is that I think that Disney, which is a company that, regardless of how you feel about it, has had a major impact on how people view the medium of animation, has now just shown, at least with this movie, that they just kind of have a complete disregard for how that medium is effective or how it works. And it's kind of sad. Honestly, it depresses me that we don't understand that animation is this medium not created to eventually become live action, but to be its own form, working in that register. So, Logan, I'm going to start with you. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts were about the movie.
I didn't like it. You may be shocked to hear. I think it sucks. The main takeaway I found from it is that it's a movie completely created by computers, and the lighting's broken. It is so dark all of the time. The lights are way too underdone, especially in nighttime scenes, especially the Be Prepared scene. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't see a thing. And I'd been in this theater before, for Detective Pikachu, and the lighting was fine. The projection was clear, and the colors popped. So it wasn't even an issue with the bulb or the projector. It was just the movie not having efficient lighting in main sequences, and the colors are so diluted and ugly. Like the landscape of Africa looks so gray and depressing and just empty. Like even in like forest sequences, the colors look drained of life and panache and style. It just looks like it's really depressing to look at, honestly. The color palette and the way that the shots are lit and framed made me really tired and sad, and it was not what I was expecting, honestly. I thought the movie was going to be broken and pointless and disrespectful to animation and cinema as a medium, but I didn't expect it to look so utterly terrible from start to finish. Especially like the way the animals move is so janky. Like especially in like musical sequences, the way they move, like it looks uncanny valley. I was frightened. Like they're so janky. Like Pumbaa moving, or like Scar trying to slurk around and be prepared, or like even in like the circle of life bit where all the animals are coming, like the lions are roaming through the field and like the giraffes, they look so stilted, and like the frame rate is broken on them, so they look like they're jittering. Like it looks like they're almost phasing in and out of frame, and it really fucked with me.
Well, yeah, and this is, and Michael, feel free to jump in, but I feel like this is kind of going into my point about why animation is so effective, because you know, the fact that it's animated allows you to kind of play with the form and move the animals, you know, the characters along in a way that feels more conducive to the actual sequence, you know, the musical sequence at hand, while when you're trying to do it in this live action form, I mean, it's just in reality, lions don't move around like that, and we know that. And so when you're trying to kind of form that while you're singing be prepared in this reimagining that they came up with, it just doesn't work. And it again goes back to the fact that I don't know why, like, there's just like this desperate need to take animated properties and make them live action as if that was like the purpose of them being there. Michael, I'm curious to get your opinion though.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my big thing, is that my interest in Disney sort of begins and ends with animation, because I love animation, and if you're looking at American animation, there's other things, but there's not that many other things besides Disney animation. And like, I actually think Disney animation is like really, really good when they do really, you know, when they actually like are interested in doing, you know, advancing the medium, which is like, Walt Disney is a terrible person, but this was sort of like, besides making money and exploiting people, he was legitimately interested in the form of animation, and like nearly bankrupted the company over like Fantasia, just because he had this like, you know, harebrained visionary idea for a movie that he like, it was just going to see through because he thought it would be cool to do an animation. And it is, like you said, super depressing that this, you know, this trend, especially when like the next Disney animated movie is a sequel. And I don't know, like, I'm not even that big of a fan of The Lion King originally anyway. And so my main interest in the movie is as an animated property. I think another thing that's really disappointing is Disney animated movies oftentimes do push the envelope as far as like what animation does, you know, like, you know, with The Lion King, like there is some really visionary like use of computers and how it used animation in the 90s. And then like, you know, further on down the line, like Disney, along with Pixar, really kind of pioneered like how to make a cartoon in computer generated animation. Because if you look at the other, like DreamWorks, what they were doing at the time, it's kind of garish. And then with like
and ironically, they were like, there was a lot of pioneering work with the lighting, going back to the Logan's point. Like the lighting in the 1994 animated Lion King movie is really impressive.
Well, yeah, the whole thing, the CAPS technology, with computer animation processing system, I think, which was developed by Pixar, is sort of the backbone of the whole quote unquote like Disney Renaissance. Which is like, you know, Little Mermaid through Tarzan, I guess. And all of those movies, like, until Tarzan, which uses something called, like, deep canvas, I think, technology. But all those movies, they look so so distinct from like, you know, a lot of other animated movies at the time, or just slightly before in the 80s, because they were using this CAPS technology, which allowed you to do like intricate shadow and lighting in like quote unquote hand-drawn animation. It was all digital at this point. But and so like when you get to something like the Lion King remake or reimagining or whatever, like what is it really doing for any medium? And there's nothing interesting. Like I think like I've heard Jon Favreau talking about like how like he thought it was an interesting experiment to do this with like photorealistic animals or whatever, but we've seen photorealistic computer animated animals before, you know, in every movie since like, you know, the mid 90s has had like, you know, computer generated animals, you know, 3 billboards in Ebbing, Missouri had a computer generated animal. You know, this is not something that's like visionary. It's just more of something that we've already seen, as opposed to like Disney animation at its best was legitimately visionary and pushing the medium forward, even though the movies I think are a little bit hit and miss. Like I said, The Lion King's not like my favorite plot-wise, but as a technical feat, it's like really doing something that up to that point hadn't been possible in the medium, and it's like really kind of stunning because of that. And then I've not seen this new movie, but I have no interest in doing it because like it takes away all the interesting things about The Lion King and doesn't add anything that I want to see added to it.
Yeah, I mean, the only really interesting things about this movie are what it does wrong, and that is quite spectacular. Like, you can imagine the potential for, like, a Lion King version in 2019 with all the technology and all the money they have. They could have made something really visually inventive and really spectacular and pushing it into a 3D realm that actually is beautiful and compelling and mesmerizing, and instead they decided to use $250 million and basically make a shot-for-shot remake with all the lighting taken out and all the good music and all the good choreography and good, you know, animation taken out and replaced by diluted pieces of shit.
Yeah,
and they added half an hour. They added half an hour, and I cannot tell you what's added. I genuinely, it's like the same thing with Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. Like, I cannot tell you what was in this that was not in the original, but it is just longer. I think the most notorious thing about this movie, and the clip of it is circling around Twitter, and it's the scene where Mufasa dies, and they try and replicate the zoom.
Oh, it's so
and
funny.
it is one of the funniest things ever, because it's a lion that looks like a real lion screaming with the worst cast child voice actor in the world, being like, no! And the zoom falls out. And the best part is, like, an hour later, they cut back to it during, like, the reveal that Scar's been lying to him, and then they blur the frame.
funny again.
They make it hazy, so they make the image look worse. They do.
That's actually directly out of the animated movie too.
Yeah, but like
Exact
it's
thing.
really funny that they made a really bad image look even worse on purpose. Like, that's the only, and also like the "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" being set in the day, and like Beyonce going "Lions Attack" like it's a meme. I started laughing hysterically when Beyonce turned up as Donald Glover's love interest. That is just hilarious to me. Like, there's such a massive difference between those two people. I could not buy it.
Logan, your point about how they could have made something really cool, but then kind of made the super conservative choice of just doing something basically the same thing as the original, but just doing it worse, is kind of touches with something that Zach and I were talking about before the podcast too, which is that it's not only frustrating that Disney's like abandoning animation, but also that like as a company as a whole, they are at the peak of their financial powers at this very moment. But they're making some of the most conservative choices as far as like what kinds of movies they make. They could be making, a Fantasia movie every year and losing $100 million on that Fantasia movie every year and still be like one of the wealthiest companies in entertainment right now. But instead, even though the risk of losing money on a single movie is so comparatively low to what it was even like 20 years ago, they're just making the most boring conservative choices. They're making Frozen 2, they're making a Lion King remake, rather than actually taking this opportunity of like financial dominance to do something interesting.
Yeah, like even like Pixar has been cost by this. Like, even though like I like Toy Story 4 a lot, it is clearly just another like piece of the factory line. Like Pixar just seems to be fulfilling like maybe a couple original movies every now and then, but we need to keep franchising because it's guaranteed to pull in the box office. And yeah, it's just like if they're gonna do franchising, they could at least do something really interesting with the IP and like be experimental and do really crazy stuff. But like even like the last time I was here, we talked about Spider-Man Far From Home. Like there's people in that who look at the like experimental quotation marks scene in that and think that's genuinely wacky. And I was like, imagine what Disney, with all this power and money and access to basically any filmmaker or actor or crew in the world and all the technology to make any wildest dream come true, they decide to make the most boring, redundant, sterile pieces of cinema imaginable, and it makes just going to the movies really depressing. Like I mentioned before we aired that I used to go to the movies like 3 times a week. I'd see literally everything that came out because I love being in the movie theater. I love going out. And now when I look at the movie schedule, I just feel so depressed because everything looks like a 2.5 movie, especially the Disney movies, because there's so many of them coming out and they're all doing the same thing and they're all redundant and they're all ugly and they're all pointless, and it's just tiring. And The Lion King, I saw it because I felt bad and I thought it would at least cheer me up to laugh at, but like the joke of the funny lions wore thin really quick, and I just kind of sat there like in a stupor of depression thinking, this is what I want to do with my life and this is what I'm being faced with, and this is going to make so much money. And it's just really a huge bummer from animation, for movies, and for a company that genuinely has made my favorite movie. Like my favorite movie of all time is by Disney. So it's really depressing. That was a bummer. Sorry, guys.
What is your favorite
Tron
movie?
Legacy. I love Tron Legacy so much. It's my favorite movie. It got me into movies.
No, it's great.
I've seen that movie 100 times at least. Yeah, like you could be making Tron 3, guys. You could give Joe Kosinski all the money in the world to make Biodigital Jazz 3, but no, we have to have John Favreau proving that he's the least filmmaker ever. Like, has there ever been a more non-entity than John Favreau behind the camera?
Well, I feel like it's also a larger discussion about the state of, like, the studio system in terms of just kind of the history of movies. Like, even the studio system in the early days of movies, but like, they were trying to make movies that would kind of do something different in the movie theater and give people a reason to go out to the movie theater and experience something. And now it's completely leaning into... You see it with just... I think it was very apparent when Marvel was doing their little shindig at Comic-Con a couple days ago, where they're completely leaning into what people are, asking for. Like the audience, the crowd is completely in demand, and to me personally, I don't see that as like a gratifying or a good thing, like, because I don't, maybe this is elitist, but I don't think the audience knows what it like. I don't think the audience is right and knows what it wants. I think that the beauty of watching movies is kind of being given something that's completely unique, that's completely ubiquitous, that just kind of comes out of nowhere and surprises you. And we're completely, I think that's what's kind of being lost with these, Lion King adjacent movies, because it's just, you're being fed what you've already eaten before, and it's like where that skit in Monty Python where he's just the guy keeps getting shoveled food until he blows up. Like that's what dealing with culture feels like in 2019. Now that we're all good and depressed, the Lion King, it's in theaters now. None of us recommend going and checking it out. Jessica, I'm gonna toss it over to you to talk about an independent movie that probably did a little bit more with what it was trying to do than anything Disney has done.
Just my one thing about the Disney thing is that I'm excited for the Mulan movie. So I really hope that they don't mess it up. I love Mulan. Anyways, so I saw a movie on, I rented it, and it's called Fast Color. So if you're listening right now, you should take your phone out and Google Fast Color, because you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and you probably haven't heard of it. But it actually came out this year, like earlier this year, and I think that it went straight to streaming services. I don't think that it played in theaters, and if it did, it was probably a limited release. It is a sci-fi movie, and it's directed by Julia Hart. This is her second feature film. She also directed Miss Stevens, which was a Netflix movie that I never actually got to see. But Fast Color stars Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and it is about a woman who has supernatural abilities, and the movie kind of like jumps straight into the action. She's on the run, and she is fleeing, and you're kind of trying to figure out what her abilities are, and it turns out that she's like a human earthquake. So like she starts to shake, like she gets really jittery, and then she has to tie herself down, and she just is an earthquake. Like she just has, like, her body shakes so bad that she is an earthquake. So when I saw that, like, while I'm watching this movie, I was like, okay, like this is interesting. Like, at least, like, I have never seen a movie where a woman is an earthquake before. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then it turns out that she is one of 3 women in her family. Like, it's passed down that they all have supernatural abilities, but her mother's ability is actually way cooler than hers, and she can take apart items with her mind into particles. And so the way that the film does it is when they introduce her mom is smoking a cigarette, and she like takes the cigarette apart while she's smoking it, and it just is particles, and then she brings it back together, which is probably like, it's one of the coolest like visual superpowers that I've ever seen. I like the concept of it is really neat, and so I was like, okay, like this is an interesting movie. And it turns out that that Gugu's character was struggling with addiction, and she had a daughter that she doesn't know who the father of it was because she was strung out when she got pregnant, and the daughter also has the grandmother's abilities. So the film ends up being about family, motherhood, and mending broken relationships. But my hang-ups about it were, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this before, but I always hate whenever you're watching a movie and you can finish the sentence of the character that's speaking. And it's like, a lot of the lines in the scripts were very predictable, and pretty much like halfway through the movie, I could see where it was going, and I knew exactly what was happening. I also, this is very important and I didn't mention it, but this is set in a post-apocalyptic world where it hasn't rained in 8 years. And so everyone is rationing water as best they can. And I watched this with a bunch of scientists, which was a mistake, because they were like, yeah, pretty much the human race would be dead by now, and this isn't actually a thing. And I was like, okay, that's great. But yeah, and I was reading some Letterboxd review, and I heard people saying like this is in the same vein as Midnight Special, which I didn't catch that movie either. But I do like indie films about superheroes, about, you know, supernatural abilities, and I think that this had all of the pieces of something that could have been great. You have strong women of color characters that are written pretty well. Gugu's character is really great. Her mom's character is really great. And the daughter is fantastic. And all of these characters work really well together. Their chemistry is great, but I think that the script really needed to be tighter. Like, it was very predictable. I didn't think that the dialogue was very good. And I also think that I couldn't really see any sort of direction with it. Like, there was nothing specific about it cinematically that I was like, oh, like, this is the director's voice in this film. And this is the first film that I've seen by Julia Hart, but there was nothing that was really fantastic about it. I read another critique where someone said this could have been like a CW, like a movie on CW, which is, you know, really bad for... So... Yeah, but I thought that it was pretty good, and I'm sad. There are lots of scenes in this that really stood out to me visually, because like that, having that sort of supernatural ability, like there is no way that visually it wouldn't look good. And there are lots of scenes in it that really stood out, and it makes me sad that not a lot of people watch this at all or have even heard of it, because it isn't the worst superhero movie ever made, and it definitely was trying. Like it had its heart in the right place.
It sadly hasn't got a UK release date, so I don't know when I'll be able to see it unless I do illegal things. But I saw Miss Stevens a couple years ago, and I liked it, but I would agree with the fact that Julia Hart does not really stand out behind the camera. She kind of just shoots everything the most basic way possible, which I guess works well for Miss Stevens because it's a really intimate character drama, but I don't really see it translating to something with more ambition like Fast Color. But I'll still give it a spin if it ever comes out here.
Well, Fast Color, I think you can probably find online. Lydia, I'm going to toss it over to you for your movie for this week.
Okay, I was catching up on the documentary, came out a couple years ago. Weiner, it's what a shit show. I had put off watching it because like I remember when this came out, like I remember all of the like really horrible dumb joke headlines about his name and what he did, and then I was like, oh, that happened in 2013. Wow, feels like ages ago, but So it's the original point of the documentary was to like try to capture the successful, they hoped, comeback of the politician Anthony Weiner, who resigned from Congress in like 2011 because lewd photos, quote unquote, were leaked of him. He was sexting, which sexting's a mistake. I'm just gonna throw this out here. No one's ever taken a good picture of their own dick, and like, don't do it.
Especially when you're married and are sending it unsolicited to other people.
Oh, yes. Okay. Those, I mean, even if someone tells you they want a picture, they don't. They're lying to you. Just, it's not a good look. So that happened in 2011, and then 2013, Anthony Weiner wants to run for mayor of New York City, and the documentary does a really good job of showing, like, he talks about his policies, and, like, he's got all these great plans to, like, help the citizens of New York City, and he's very passionate, like, defender of 9/11 victim, like, firefighters. But in the middle, like, I think it's 8 weeks before the mayoral election, like, more photos are leaked, and they're even fucking worse because they happened after this first scandal. It wasn't like old pictures from the time. It's like, nope, new ones. And then he just doesn't quit. And so the whole, yeah, he just got out. Yeah. The whole trajectory of this documentary suddenly becomes about his, like, escalating, like, insane behavior. And I couldn't look, like, I thought I knew this story because I was like, yeah, I remember all this. But just, like, some of the details and, like, the behind the scenes, like, there's meetings that he has to have with, like, all of his volunteers, maybe they're paid, like, young staffers. Like, they have a meeting in their house and they're all just like, what the fuck, dude? Like, are there more pictures? I can't
like,
do this.
throw them in jail or something.
Like, is there anything else you're not telling us? And Anthony Weiner is like a manic, cagey guy. Like, he suddenly stops being able to make eye contact with like anybody for the whole second half of this documentary. It's amazing that like this footage, I guess, exists.
Isn't there a part of the movie where the documentary makers like ask him like, why are you letting us film this or something? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, it's like one of the last things that happens. And I know that there's this like post all of this interview, like it's kind of interspersed throughout. It's like Anthony Weiner in like a whitish room sitting in a chair, like answering questions like, oh, this is what happened. But like, that's an amazing interview too, because again, like no eye contact. And he also like, he just can't explain why he did it. Like, I think he's got a problem, like some sort of pathological, I mean, aside from thinking somebody wants to see his dick, which they don't, nobody does. But I like this like self-destructive behavior. Like, I don't understand. I mean, I do understand, but the hubris to think that I can run for public office and like I deserve to like have this chance and stay in the race, but to behave like, you know, your whole life, not just your life, but the life of your family and the people associated with you. One of the things like is going to come under such intense scrutiny and then still behaving in outlandish, inappropriate ways. I feel terrible for Huma. Just Huma, because when the news breaks in the film and the documentary filmmakers are still like catching all of this, and he like has to go out and do that initial press conference, just like this haunted look comes into her eyes and doesn't leave for the rest of the documentary. And it'd be funny if it weren't like, no, this happened. This is real.
Well, and the Weiner investigation like had something to do with Hillary's the emails, right? Like that whole non-issue. There's a connection there that I can't remember the details of.
Wasn't she Clinton's campaign manager?
And one of her closest aides, yeah.
That didn't work out for her either.
It seems like an easy choice.
Oh God, I'd blocked that out of my memory.
I think they were discussing, I don't think Hillary liked Weiner, and it's just like, you can't, because it kind of maybe came up a little bit in the documentary, like some dumb tabloid headline, but it's like, gotta pick your husband or Hillary, and it's like, yeah, don't pick your piece of shit husband again. I mean, they're still together, officially. I mean, separated maybe, but like not divorced. I just
don't understand, like, how he didn't learn after the first time. If he wants to send dick pics, not be that blatant about it. Like, how do you not, like, learn from your mistakes? He did the same thing again. Like, exactly the same methodology. Like, he didn't change his practice at all. Of course he was going to get caught. Like, what the fuck? It's just baffling. Like,
and, like, I'd forgotten about the character of the 23-year-old want to be, I guess. I don't know if this ever made her career take off. Porn star, the one who like came forward with the photos and like showed up on Howard Stern and like was stalking him outside of his office, and like the whole fucking episode of him like running through the back of a McDonald's. I just was losing my mind that this was happening, and like he refused to drop out, and he like, did he think he was being scrappy? It's like, I'm a fighter. Like, no, you came in dead last in the exit polls. Like, duh, everyone's appalled.
Do you think anyone actually like went and voted for him, like genuinely, or do you think it was just all pity?
I mean, maybe joke votes, because like they showed the results too. It was like fucking brutal. The guy who actually won got like 40-something% of the votes, and then Anthony was down there with like 5%, which is still 5%.
5% of New York is a lot of people.
Then you should.
Yeah, but I doubt everyone voted for the mayor.
It's good. I'm sorry.
Weiner is available on Hulu if you'd like to watch it, I believe. We're gonna take a break. We're gonna take a break though. We'll be talking late spring after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 257 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be talking about 1949's Late Spring as part of our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series. Late Spring is directed by Yasuhiro Ozu from a script by Ozu and Kogo Nodo. The film stars Chihisu Ryu and Setsuko Hara and is based on the short novel Father and Daughter by the 20th century novelist and critic Kazu Hirotsu. The film was written and shot during the Allied powers' occupation of Japan and was subject to the occupation's official censorship requirements. It is the first installment of Ozu's so-called Noriko trilogy. The others are 1951's Early Summer and 1953's Tokyo Story, in each of which Hara portrays a young woman named Noriko, though the three Norikos are distinct, unrelated characters linked primarily by their status as single women in post-war Japan. Late Spring belongs to the type of Japanese film known as shomengeki, a genre that deals with the ordinary daily lives of working class and middle class people of modern times. The film is frequently regarded as the first in the director's final creative period, quote, the major prototype of the director's 1950s and 1960s work. These films are characterized by, among other traits, an exclusive focus on stories about families during Japan's immediate post-war era, a tendency towards very simple plots, and the use of generally static cameras. The central event of Late Spring is the marriage of the heroine to a man she has met only once through a single arranged meeting. This immediately presented a problem for the censors of the American occupation. According to film scholar Kayoko Hirano, these officials, quote, considered feudalistic the Japanese custom of arranged meetings for prospective marriage partners because the custom seemed to them to downgrade the importance of the individual. Hirano notes that had this policy against showing arranged marriages on screen been rigidly enforced, Late Spring could never have been made. In the original synopsis, which the filmmakers were required to submit to the censorship before production could be approved, Noriko's decision to marry was presented as a collective family decision, not an individual choice, and the censors apparently rejected this. The synopsis explained that the trip to Kyoto by father and daughter just prior to Noriko's marriage occurs so she can visit her dead mother's grave. This motivation is absent from the finished film, possibly because the censors would have interpreted such a visit as, quote, ancestor worship, a practice they frowned upon. Any reference in the script to the devastation caused by the Allied bombings was removed. In the script, Shukichi remarks to Onodera's wife in Kyoto that her city is a very nice place, unlike Tokyo with all its ruins. The censors deleted the reference to ruins as an implied critique of the Allies, and in the finished film, the word Hokoripoi, which means dusty, was substituted as a description of Tokyo. The censors at first automatically deleted a reference in the script to the Hollywood star Gary Cooper, but then reinstated it when they realized that the comparison was to Noriko's unseen suitor Sataki, who is described by the female characters as attractive and was thus flattering to the American actor. One scholar, Lars Martin Sorensen, has claimed that Ozu's partial aim in making the film was to present an ideal of Japan at odds with that which the occupation wanted to promote, and that he successfully subverted the censorship in order to accomplish this. Quote, the controversial and subversive politico-historical message of the film is that the beauty of tradition and of subjugation of individual whims to tradition and history by far outshines the imported and imposed Western trends of occupied Japan. Basing his research upon files kept on the film by the Allied censorship, Sorensen notes, quote, generally speaking, the film was hailed with enthusiasm by Japanese critics when it opened at theaters. The publication Shin Yukan emphasized the scenes that take place in Kyoto, describing them as embodying, quote, the calm Japanese atmosphere of the entire work. Asahi Shimbun complained that, quote, the tempo is not the feeling of the present period, and the reviewer for Hochi Shimbun warned that Ozu should choose more progressive themes, or else he would, quote, coagulate. In 1972, when the film premiered in New York, the New York Times said, the difficulty with Ozu is not in appreciating his films, but in describing an Ozu work in a way that doesn't diminish it, that doesn't reduce it to an inventory of his austere techniques, and that accurately reflects the unsentimental humanism of his discipline. In 2005, Roger Ebert said, so much happens out of sight in the film, implied but not shown. Noriko smiles but is not happy. Her father passively accepts what he hates is happening. The aunt is complacent, implacable, maddening. She gets her way. It is universally believed, just as in a Jane Austen novel, that a woman of a certain age is in want of a husband. Late Spring is a film about two people who desperately do not believe this, and about how they are undone by their tact, their concern for each other, and their need to make others comfortable by seeming to agree with them. On that note, let's jump into Late Spring. This is the second Ozu film that we've tackled. We talked about Tokyo's Story on a previous Young Critic series. Jessica, I'm going to start with you. I'm curious. I know you were on the Tokyo Story episode and we're a big fan of that film, so I'm curious how you felt about Late Spring as part of this kind of trilogy of Noriko films.
Yeah, so I love that Ebert review with him talking about how, like, clearly these are two people who do not agree with what is happening. They are both very sad, but they're putting on a performance. And I think that Ozu does that really well. He does it in Tokyo Story as well, where the parents are really upset with how their kids are kind of just tossing them to the side, but they know that it's just a part of life, and so they sort of just put on a mask and pretend that they're happy. And I think the closing shot of Late Spring, where the father is just like peeling an apple and is like just, you know, holds his head down, is just, I think it just encapsulates like what the whole entire movie is about. I think it's really interesting.
It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I actually watched this with my boyfriend, and he was kind of like disappointed with the ending because he was like, well, why are they going along with this? Like, clearly she doesn't want to marry this guy, and she doesn't want it to happen. Like, why are they letting this happen? And my argument is that, like, it's you know, they're saying one thing, but their reaction is saying another thing. So and you can tell by her father, like, is constantly asking her, well, is this what you really want? Well, you know, are you happy? It's going to be fine. Like, this is what you have to do. And like, they're saying these things, but they're acting another way. And so I think that it's really smart that that's the way that Ozu chose to do the movie.
Lydia, I'm curious. I know you've seen both Late Spring and Tokyo Story, and that I think you favor this one a little bit more than Tokyo Story. So, what about Late Spring kind of speaks to you more than the other one?
Well, okay. Andrew mentioned this to me, I guess, kind of as a joke, but he's like, I think Late Spring is like the stealth ace representation that you didn't know. And I was just like, I really relate to Setsuko Hara's character a lot more than I do in Tokyo Story. Like, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to, do what society expects of you. And also, I just like, she says the meanest shit with just like a sweet smile. Like, this is like a little bit melancholy like the other Ozu films I've seen, but it's also really funny, and it has like really good true to life moments. I also really like the aunt character. I think she's obnoxious, but she does a thing like right before or right when they're leaving to go to the wedding. She just like walks around the room twice just looking for stuff that might have been left behind. I'm like, that's such a good detail. And I think Ozu movies are full of that. Like, it's really carefully, brilliantly observed.
Yeah. Michael, what did you make of the movie?
I really liked it. Ozu has so many movies it feels hard for me to say I'm well versed, but I've seen a handful, and I like this one not as much as Tokyo Story, but I think that Tokyo Story is default my favorite because it's the first I saw, so that was the first experience with his themes. But one of the things I really like, which you guys have already kind of touched on, is I think this movie really, really compellingly portrays like how difficult it is to break out of social convention. Like, I think that there's this kind of like romanticized idea of like us as individuals, and we have our own ideas of who we want to be as people. Interiorly, we understand like, this is who I am, but it's really, really difficult to actually put that into practice when you're working against these like larger social forces. So like as like Jessica, you were talking about how like clear it is that these people are making decisions like that are socially conventional, but are clearly not going to make them happy. Like they're content with the status quo to a certain extent, and their status quo being something that's unconventional, an unmarried daughter living with her father, and I the sort of like fantasy that I think at least I have about myself sometimes of oh, I'm my own person, I have made decisions and that's why I'm who I am, is validated by a lot of movies. I think movies are full of characters who are like, they're so quirky and they're self-actualizing of their own person. And I think that this movie does a good job of showing like why people aren't really like that in real life. And the whole movie is kind of is a move away from self-actualization toward like social conformity in a way that's like really crushing and sad. And I connected to that pretty well.
Logan, before we move on, I'm curious what you made of the film.
I'm a big fan. It's the only Ozu I've seen so far, but I loved it when I first saw it last year. And it connected with me more this watch. I guess maybe because of the place I'm at in my life. I've kind of spent the last couple years in stasis, almost because of a varying degree of personal issues. And now, at this stage in my life, I'm kind of at a crossroads between what I'm going to do with the rest of my time, the rest of my existence. And there is that kind of dilemma between doing something new and verging out into a program, into a life that is scary and different and something that I don't know will be good for me or beneficial, or staying in my comfort zone with my dad. Staying in this place that I don't have to worry, and that there's always a purpose and there's always a place for me, and there's always something nice and calm and relaxing to look forward to, or to trying to push myself into a future, a future that might not be the exact one that I dream or that I want, but that is mine. And I guess there is that kind of conflict between the easy and the difficult. And Late Spring is much more melancholic than my situation. Mine is just about picking a school. Mine is about picking a course. Mine is picking what do I want to do with my life. But it is kind of the same principle at heart, and it made me really deeply relate to it on this viewing. Whereas I just kind of empathized in the first. The first time I saw it, the ending crushed me because it showed that these people just they did what they felt was right in this current society, in this current situation, even if it broke them apart. And when I first saw that, I was just really heartbroken for them. And now it kind of set me into like an existential tailspin, and it's like, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I make myself unhappy and make the people around me unhappy because of what I choose to do and what I choose to exist as and what I do with myself? And it's just that kind of like deeply existential, deeply moving kind of relatability that made it really click with me this time. When it was over, I was just like, I wanted to call my dad and be like, thanks for putting up with my bullshit. I really love this movie a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition to kind of the first point I wanted to hit on, and I alluded to it a little bit in the intro notes, but this is very much, I mean, Tokyo Story and Early Summer also deal with this, but it's very much a movie entrenched in this post-war Japan, and especially at this time, an occupied Japan by American forces. Sorensen, who wrote extensively about the film and Ozu at large, he talks about one sequence in the film where Satsuko Hara's character is bike riding with the assistant of her father, and it's a pretty, it's a pretty standard scene. They're just kind of they're bike riding along the beach, and you have this, and it's kind of a throwaway image. You don't really think too much of it necessarily until you watch it multiple times, but you have that giant drink Coca-Cola sign that appears, and then you also have a sign that says that the road can handle up to 30 tons, which kind of insinuates that, American military vehicles would be, passing along this road that they're riding bikes on. And so I'm kind of curious what you all made of, kind of looking at the familial situation that Satsuko Hara's character and Shihisu Ru's character are kind of going through, but also under the context of this is a country that is currently occupied and kind of coming to grips with what they're like, just the kind of country's identity after the war. I mean, did you kind of think of that while watching the film?
I think one of the interesting and tough things that happens when like a country is occupied by, a foreign power is the country's relationship to its own tradition and its own identity under those circumstances. And in a weird way, like there's that push and pull in this movie where the commitment to the sort of tradition of the arranged marriage or whatever has a sort of, in the context of an occupation, and I didn't look up the history of the censors, but the fact that was met with consternation by them kind of makes it seem even more like kind of like a, I don't know, I'm conflicted on it because I think the movie like clearly is like kind of melancholic about it, but at the same time it's also an assertion of a tradition under circumstances in which that tradition is being opposed by their occupiers. And so there's a kind of push and pull of like the feelings toward that because of it, the kind of larger social milieu, I guess.
I think this movie is also extremely concerned about like women's changing roles in Japanese society. I also really like the Aya Chan character, who's like already a divorcee, and it's just like, you don't have to get married. It's like, I hate that I have to work, but like I make pretty good money. Like I'm actually like a very independent person. And Noriko, I mean, this is the problem of like a society that's also been like very rapidly forced to modernize. And it's maybe just because I've been so steeped in reading about fairy tales, but like one of the problems for Noriko, Satsuko Hara's character, is like she doesn't like have a place outside of a household. Like it's still, I mean, American society too, but like Japanese society is like patrilineal, and like the problem of remarrying is that it's gonna force the daughter of the previous marriage like out of the house. Like the father character lies, like, oh, I'm gonna get remarried, and she kind of says, oh, nobody will take care of you, but there's also this whole other issue of like if the father remarries, then like the new wife suddenly has more right, like the daughter needs to leave, like economically speaking, doesn't have choices. I mean, does sort of have choices. Things are changing. She has a friend who like is fine, but there's still that mindset, like there's like intention there.
Well, and I also think, kind of going to the point that you were talking about earlier, Lydia, Setsuko Hara's character in this is so unique, just kind of in terms of movies. I mean, you don't see a character that's so kind of confidently independent in the way that she is, because like you mentioned before, like she genuinely has absolutely no desire to get married or have any sort of relationship outside of just enjoying the company of her father. And I think that it kind of comes as almost like a foreign concept to just about anybody, whether it's you know, in Japanese culture or American culture, that she would be so settled into this role. Like just the settledness that she has seems foreign to everybody. And I think that kind of plays into it as well. Did anybody else have kind of any other thoughts about Setsuko Hara's character? Because I think I love her in Tokyo Story, but I think that the performance that she gives in Late Spring is something really special in terms of like her her work in Ozu films, because she is just this very confident character, and the way that she shifts from that confidence to kind of breaking down a little bit when she's kind of having to make the decision is just becomes so heart-wrenching at times.
Yeah, that was what the point I was going to make, is that this kind of confidence kind of fades into like melancholic doubt. Like you can like she's projecting really well. Like I recognize this a lot in myself, not to make all of my analysis about myself, but it's kind of hard not to when you connect really personally to a movie. But it's like you get used to performing the idea of being okay, even in front of the people you care about, because so much of life is about performance. When you're kind of rejected by the status quo, you need to pretend, you need to kind of forge an identity of self-assuredness to kind of get through the day, to get through like general interactions with society. And you can kind of tell that she's got this kind of barrier up when dealing with any form of societal doubts or progress or whatever she wants to do with her life in relation to her father and to the prospect of marrying someone else. You can kind of see that barrier go up, and the more she has time to think about it, the more she reflects upon it, the more it cracks, and the more unsure she seems of herself, even in just little nuances of her face and her body language. It recognizes, I recognize that as a part of myself, as someone who also kind of struggles with the idea of change and of trying to cope with adverse situations that you don't really want to deal with or think about. And you could almost just kind of see in her eyes like the surge of thoughts going through her brain. Like you could almost feel just all the anxieties, all the doubts, all the questions, all the fears just kind of stacking up. And I felt that if you can convey that through just a few gestures, then it's one of the all-time great performances I've ever seen. It's definitely an all-time favorite for me, and it is my favorite thing about the movie.
What did you all make of the Chihisu Ryu character, the father character?
He's so cute.
Do you feel like he kind of what Jessica was talking about earlier? Do you feel like he is kind of listening to the what Noriko is saying and believes her, but is just kind of conflicted with the traditional values, or is he more in line with those traditional values? What did you make of kind of his decision-making process in terms of the narrative?
I think it doesn't really have as much to do with tradition in his mindset as much as he thinks that it will make her happier. Like in the long term, I think he's just terrified on being on his deathbed and seeing his daughter like in her middle age with no purpose anymore, and I think that thought terrifies him more than anything. And that he's making this decision even if it costs him despair, because he thinks that it will give her a purpose that outlives him and makes her happier in the long run instead of being ignored and sad and dying alone. But I do think traditional. Sorry, no, you go.
No, I was just. I also don't know like if she could inherit anything from him. Again, like I don't know what the rule like kinship laws are in Japan, but I have
in the late 40s.
Yeah, but I have the feeling that like he was also worried about dying, leaving her on her own, no purpose, but like also no means.
Yeah, like she doesn't have like a stable income either. So like even if he left her a lot of money, she probably wouldn't be able to sustain herself, especially with like a changing society and the potential of like post-war inflation and poverty and economic shifts. So it's just yeah. I do think tradition may come into a certain point because of like the societal pressures. But I do think that he wouldn't, from his character and their relationship that we see in the rest of the movie, I don't think he would make such a seismic decision just because of the influence of culture around him, but for a personal reason. And I think that's implied by the final scene.
Well, I think that's part of the tragedy of the movie too, is that like because of social norms, and because like the intersection of social norms and these like kind of personal feelings and the way in which like a lot of those become incompatible at a certain point, like, you know, the reason, you know, I mean, you're talking about Lydia, the amount of, you know, patrimonial inheritance like built into the society because of these social norms is influencing his own personal feelings about his daughter's future in a way that like is not really him like abstractly considering social norms and being like, well, because of the social norms I have to do this, but it's like just like baked into the reality of what they have to experience. So whether or not he would have felt this way if society were different is kind of beside the point, because this is the society he has to deal with. So like that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about how difficult it is to, you know, transgress social norms, because your entire reality is bent around them in a way that is like, it takes a lot of work and a lot of risk to truly, you know, branch out on your own, especially, you know, like in this movie where there's kind of a, you know, a financial as well as emotional stake.
And he got so excited when he thought she was going to marry his assistant. It's like, oh, can stay close to home. It's like somebody I know. And it's like they have a friendship. Like, clearly he cares about her also, like, finding a compatible match if one exists and, like, being happy in that way. But I think he's feeling a lot of, like, just a lot of pressure beside, like, the aunt's putting a lot of pressure on him. And he knows what life is like. Like, kind of unavoidable facts.
I think there's no way you make the decision that he makes at the end of that movie where you lie to your daughter to make her make such a giant life change if you aren't feeling pressure. Like, that's not a decision that you just make lightly. Like, it's an extremely heavy decision, and one that she's obviously going to find out about.
Yeah.
And not too long when she figures out that he's not married. Like,
yeah, I don't understand why he didn't just like try and get married. Like, he probably could have used, like, the aunt to help with that, because I feel like there should have been, like, he could have just figured something out instead of doing this really obvious lie to her. Is he just assuming that she'll never come back?
I think there's also, like, this obvious, like, antipathy towards the idea of remarrying. Like, Tsukahara carriage, like, finds it disgusting, and, like, we don't know the circumstances of how he became a widow or like any lingering thoughts about your dead wife. But he also seems like very content, like to just be on his own and like not partner. Like that's fine. He's got companionship in the form of his kid, but again, that's unusual still even today in society to like be okay with that situation.
I guess the dichotomy is that he makes like he kind of forces her into sacrificing something by marrying someone else, but then he doesn't fall through on his own sacrifice. so he just kind of half-asses it.
Well, his sacrifice is he loses his access to his kid. Like,
Yeah.
I
I know, but she loses access to her father, and she has to marry someone she doesn't want to marry. Like, she gets way worse than he does. Like, come on, man.
That's true. All times, always.
But I also think that there's also that seeking security, because again, going back to the point I was talking about at the beginning, I mean, they had just gone. They're occupied by this foreign entity. They just went through the war. Like, he's probably going. The future probably looks very bleak at this point. So he's like, that's probably filtering through his decision making process as well. As I want to make sure has somebody who can take care of her in the long run, not only because of her place in society as a woman, but also because Japanese society at this point is so fractured and up in the air because of the occupation by the United States in the nation, as well as just kind of their political state at that point in time. I want to kind of close up with a little bit of a more wide-ranging discussion on Ozu as a director. I feel like he's probably somebody that even as somebody like me who's a big fan of his work, I mean, he's probably one of my favorite directors. You definitely have to be in the mood for an Ozu movie. You can't just kind of be like, it's let's put something on. And it's kind of interesting to look at him in terms of how he handled post-war Japan compared to his contemporaries like Mizoguchi or Kurosawa, who both kind of handled the post-war Japanese society in different ways. I guess watching movies by Ozu, not just Late Spring, but kind of anything that he's done. I mean, what about that kind of the way he handles the familial drama, the melancholy? What about it is so affecting for you compared to just kind of a similar story told by maybe a Western director or a Western writer? I guess what about it is so affecting in the way that he shoots it and presents it?
I guess the way that it clicks for me is that it never feels overdone or saccharine. It always feels so natural and relaxed and contained, and it genuinely builds to something emotional without having to tug at your heartstrings dramatically. It feels so sensitive and caring and open-minded and empathetic. Like, there's no jarring, scathing attack on anyone in this movie. There's no brutal orchestra compositions or I think if a Western filmed the ending of Late Spring, it'd be a lot more dramatic and a lot less subtle. And it's the subtle mundanity of the ending that makes it so tragic to me. And I think the way that Ozu restrains himself is really beautiful. And also, I think the way he uses location, by the end of the movie, you know the house so well. So, and you know her place in the house so well, how she moves around it. See her actually have to leave it feels gutting, like it's leaving your own childhood home because you've become so accommodated to the locations that you see. And that's such a sparse detail that I think a lot of Western filmmakers would overlook. And I really like architecture and geography in movies, and I think Ozu, even in just this one film I've seen from him, is like a master of utilizing space in his form.
There's definitely this. I mean, I think kind of to your point about how when she finally leaves that space, it has this almost visceral reaction, because the way he familiarizes you with the space is, like you said, very subtle. Like you learn the different curves of the house. You kind of, it's almost like you're, to an extent, like leaving. He's able to represent in a cinematic way the act of leaving home, unlike anybody else has been able to, because he familiarizes you with the meaning of the space. You get these scenes that seem kind of small, where it's them having tea, or it's them enjoying tea and bread, or where it's establishing kind of the space, and it's able to kind of move the narrative along and kind of add details in that respect. But at the same time, it recognizes how important that space is to the person. And so when she's leaving there and he comes back home at the very end, and it's just kind of empty. You feel it more, not only just from the performance of Chi Soo-roo, but the way that the camera just has this vacancy around it that you, for the last hour and 30 minutes or so, you've had, and I think that there's just nobody else who cinematically is able to capture that feeling like Ozu does.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Zach, because Ozu actually influenced a lot of filmmakers too, and I think that Kogonada really took that spatial technique from Ozu in Columbus, because once Haley Lou Richardson's character leaves and you see the shots of John Chu's character just in the same spaces, you can tell that she's gone. And so it's really interesting that Ozu had such a profound influence on other directors as well. I also think this is only my second Ozu movie, but I also think that his films are timeless, and I'm sure that it's a testament to his writing and how good he is with portraying familial themes. But I think that, with Tokyo Story and with this film, I think that when you watch it in different stages of your life, you relate to different characters. So when I watch Late Spring, obviously I relate to the daughter, but if I ever have kids in the future and I rewatch Late Spring, then I might relate to the father character more.
I thought of Columbus as well, actually. Yeah, it reminded me of how it used form and location. I think Columbus is a little more uplifting in its climax than Late Spring is. Even though there is that emptiness, there is that kind of that look at John Cho's eyes that this partnership, this moment of connection has brought something to his life that wasn't there before, and that even though the spaces and these streets don't look the same anymore, there is still that beauty, that the fact that they had these memories in the first place. Where in Late Spring it is kind of all about the teething process of that grief, that loss, that absence. And so I think Late Spring ends just before the contentment of having these 20 plus years with his daughter hits him. It's kind of all about that lingering, that saying goodbye feeling of just kind of crying in the air, when the kid goes to college style feeling. That's where it ends on. And that makes it a really challenging movie for me, because it doesn't feel resolved. It doesn't feel finished in the way that you're accustomed to with Western cinema. It just kind of ends, and then the ending is something that really sits with you, really lingers with you. And I've thought about the ending before this rewatch for over a year, and when I wasn't quite prepared for it, even due to that, I was still kind of walked into this sitting and kind of got blown away by how much I wanted it to keep going so that they could have one last moment together. And then it never came, and that broke my heart.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on Late Spring before we wrap up?
It's a good movie. Oh yeah.
It rules.
Go watch more Ozu, everybody.
I'm going to. I have.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I believe that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Also, if you would like to help support our wonderful writers who are giving their time to write reviews and other things for the website, please support us on Patreon. We have a lot of great stuff. We've got great reviews on our very... trying to find a good adjective for our film theory and chill, but we've got good feedback on it, for sure. So we thank our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Will Carroll. Thank you so much for your patronage, and hopefully more people will join on Patreon. We have some more fun film theory and chills coming up in the near future. Next week, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1953's Pickup on South Street. So heading back to America for this one. If you have not listened to our Young Critics up to this point, please head back. We've got some great episodes so far. I think the series has been going off swimmingly to this point. We talked about Lion King earlier. We have a review on the website from Courtney Anderson. We also have reviews of The Last Black Man in San Francisco by Jessica and a review of Rocket Man by Logan. So head over to cinematary.com to read those. But until next time, thank you guys for listening.